an incumbent sort of came in and just didn't want to compete on the merits of their own product, right? And felt that they wanted to compete, using dollars, which if I had whatever, $600 million market cap, 500 million, I can't blame them, right? But I'm just disappointed. And I think I'd sort of leave it at that.
Hey, this is Jesse here, and you're about to hear my discussion with Pranav from Pikkit, which is all of your bets and friends in one place. In this episode, Pranav shares his perspective on how Pikkit became the top bet tracking tool in the market, the technical challenges of doing automated bet tracking at scale, how building social features within the product helped them to grow to over 1 million users and over $10 billion in bets tracked, why they refused to implement the #1 most requested feature from users, recent controversy around Twitter abruptly disabling their API access in public fashion, and how it feels to finally get cash flow positive after raising $9 million in capital to get there. I've been excited to do this episode with Pikkit for a long time, and it was worth the wait for this fun discussion with Pranav, which I already know you're going to enjoy. The Betting Startups podcast is presented by Optimove, the creator of positionless marketing and the #1 player engagement platform. Positionless marketing gives every marketer the power to execute any marketing task instantly and independently, and Optimove Ignite Plus is its program to support early-stage iGaming startups. If you're attending G2E in Las Vegas this October, you can find Optimove at stand number 2630 and tell them that Betting Startups sent you to receive your first month free. All right, we are back here on the Betting Startups podcast. My voice is a little bit shot right now. The seasonal cold and flu is going around. I fell victim to it earlier in the week, as has my guest. So we're going to do our best to hang in there. And speaking of my guest, I'm just going to relay a quick anecdote here off the top. I launched the pod almost 4 years ago. And the first, 20, 25 episodes, I had to go out there and convince people to jump on this, non-existent pod. And I was out there really chasing people around to come on as guests. At some point that flipped where it turned into inbound, right? People asked to come on and really made the whole guest booking process easy. But there was always a few guests I wanted to have on, and for whatever reason, it never quite lined up. Today's guest is one of those. I've been chasing them around for a couple of years now to come on the podcast. And today is the day. I have my friend Pranav from Pikkit here. Pranav, welcome. I hope you're feeling better, but how are you doing today in New York City?
I'm great, Jesse. It's a beautiful 80-degree day in New York City in September, so I can't complain.
Look, as I said, I've been waiting for this one for a long time. I got lots I want to talk about, but let's just start at the top here. Pranav, tell the audience a bit about yourself, who you are, your background, and some of the major chapters of your journey prior to co-founding Pikkit.
Yeah, love to. First of all, thanks for having me on. I'm glad that we were able to do this after so many years. You know us. We sort of come up for air every so often, usually heads down, working on the product and hopefully delighting our users, but I'm glad to get the opportunity to do this. Originally, I'm from Boston. That's sort of like where all this starts. I was born in Boston in 1998, which is what I like to say is like literally the best time to be born as a sports fan anywhere ever, right? Like I saw, I think 11 championships before I turned 18. So I grew up like an absolute sports nut. It was impossible like growing up as like a teenage boy in Boston during that time to not be. And I always loved sort of computers and sports. Like those were the two things. And my first dream was to be a baseball player. And, quickly figured out in like 6th grade varsity tryouts that wasn't going to happen. So I kind of, spent the rest of my middle school and high school years just trying to figure out how I could blend like this love of computers and like my sports fandom together into something that hopefully, I can do for the rest of my life and not feel like I'm working. And yeah, so I went to high school in Boston, continued sort of tinkering around building websites and sports. And then that actually brought me to Michigan, where I met my now co-founder, Anthony. Anthony and I came up with Pikkit, the idea for Pikkit in our junior year of college. And ever since then, it's been sort of off to the races. But the story of Pikkit starts very, very early on for both me and Anthony.
Well, let's just pick up there, Pranav. I mean, junior year, you and Anthony sync up. Tell us a bit more about that, the initial conversations and what ultimately was the catalyst to say, you know what, we're going to build this thing. We're going to start a company. Let's go. Give us a bit of the origin story.
So Anthony is one of my best friends from college. I met him freshman year. Actually, I met him senior year of high school. We played golf against each other in high school. And I was like, who's this jerk, basically, who, he wouldn't talk to me the whole round. He was like doing like the Tiger Woods thing. I was like, we're not good enough to pull off this Tiger Woods act. But I was like, who's this jerk? And then sure enough, first day of college, right? He shows up and, I was coming from the East Coast to Michigan in the Midwest. I, really didn't know anyone. He was the only person I knew. So I went up to him, introduced myself again. And ever since then, we were in the same classes. We did computer science together. And there was one sort of formative summer where like the seeds of Pikkit were planted. Was the summer of 2018. Anthony and I were doing an internship at Amazon that summer. And we lived together and we hated it. Like working at Amazon was cool. Living in Seattle was cool. But the general like kind of 9 to 5 grind of like just a software engineering job at a company that, hundreds of thousands of employees was not something that, we felt like we were cut out for the rest of our careers. So we'd come back after work every day after our internship and just sort of like complain to each other and just be like, there has to be, something more interesting that will just like scratch our creative itch. And that's when we started to spitball ideas. And sports and sports betting was like sort of like tangential to some of these ideas, but we were really into tech. Like that was right when the self-driving sort of wave was starting. So we were just talking about all sorts of different things. We come back to school, and it's important to note the summer of 2018 is about a month after PASPA was struck down in May of 2018. So it hadn't really like seeped in. Like DraftKings, I think, launched their sports book in August of 2018 because there was like a little bit of delay between the Supreme Court ruling and actually launching these products. So that timed up perfectly with the return to school. And it was like a switch flipped, right? In fall of 2017, every single one of our group chats was fantasy football, fantasy football, fantasy football. And we come back in the fall of 2018 and everything was sports betting, sports betting, sports betting, even though it hadn't gone live in Michigan yet, right? This switch flipped and suddenly ESPN was talking about it, right? The NFL was embracing kind of gambling partnerships. Perhaps not that early, right? But like you get the vibe. That was the sort of moment where we were like, okay, there's something here to build, right? And actually the first idea that we had was something that it's funny that we're doing this podcast today and not 2 years ago. But the first idea we had was essentially what Kalshi is today. We were like, what if you could trade or bet against anyone on anything, right? Our idea in college was like, oh, what if we could bet on beer pong games, right? And actually automatically settle the result of these beer pong games. Turns out not a real problem that, adults have, in life. But we spent like 2-3 years tinkering on bunch of different ideas in the betting space. We never really were able to push through on the, regulatory side of things and didn't frankly have the patience that the Kalshi folks have and some of the sweeps folks have. And it was really 2021 where when sports betting went live in Michigan, one of our friends called us up and was like, hey, why are you guys wasting your time building all these, little gadget apps of where I can bet against my friends and keep track of my beer pong games and stuff like that? Like, why do something useful? Like I just signed up for DraftKings and FanDuel and MGM, and like it's a pain to keep track of all my bets across all of these, right? I have 20 bets open on FanDuel, 20 on DraftKings. And that was sort of the light bulb moment where we were like, maybe there is a way that we could build sort of like an automated way to keep track of this stuff for people. Because we asked, how are you keeping track of it? And he was like, I'm literally taking notes in an Excel sheet. And that was when sort of the moment was born. And ever since then, we've been sort of off to the races with the concept of our social sports betting tracker.
Right on, Pranav. Well, let's talk a bit more about Pikkit now in terms of what you guys have in market today here in 2025. For the benefit of the audience, let's assume some people haven't heard of Pikkit. I don't know who that would be that listens to this, but let's just assume for a minute. Give a quick high concept pitch. What is it? Who uses it? And just what's the overall value prop?
Yeah, for your audience, I could probably go a little bit deeper. For sort of the casual, I usually describe it as like a mint for sports betting with some social features mixed into that. For someone who's like in the sports betting space, it's an aggregator, right? It's a bet tracker. Users sign up, download our app, and then hook up all their different sports betting accounts, DFS accounts, sweeps, etc. And we pull in essentially all of their betting data for them, right? And you might have 1,000 bets that you've made on DraftKings and 1,000 that you've made on Caesars. We pull all that data in, we clean it, we parse it, and then we present it back to the user in hopefully like insightful and analytical ways, right? We'll give people basic P&L reports, right? I was up $100 last month, I'm down 200 this month, but we cut the data across as many different dimensions as the user wants, right? So we'll say, hey, you're better at betting on straight bets or parlays, on NFL versus NBA. And then there's also kind of, so that's sort of like the analysis phase. And what we're working on now is like, how can we be more helpful to the sports bettor in the bet discovery and sort of like live bet tracking phase? How can we find them bets that they want to make. And once they've actually made those, how can we make that a little bit more entertaining, right? Like having your friends react to it, trash talk mid-game, as well as like live like projections, right? Like, hey, my bet is likely to win or lose while it's actually happening in front of you.
I want to talk about bet tracking just for a second, Pranav. And look, I think by my last count, there was over, 10,000 apps now that do bet tracking. I'm joking a little bit here, but bet tracking as a feature when Pikkit started, I think was a unique proposition. Now, I would argue that it's probably table stakes, right? It's pretty commoditized at this point. And I would suggest, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I'd love to get your perspective. I would suggest that Pikkit as a brand has become somewhat synonymous with bet tracking, almost ubiquitous now in the same way that like a cotton swab isn't a cotton swab, it's a Q-tip. It's the same way a bandage isn't a bandage, it's a Band-Aid, right? I would say bet tracking is like, hey, show me your Pikkit. Talk just a bit about, I think, how you guys have made yourselves synonymous with bet tracking. And in my opinion, again, really own that feature now.
I appreciate the kind words. I don't know if we're there yet. I hope that we someday will get there. But yeah, I think there's a couple of components that go into that, right? I think the first is we were very early, right? We were some of the first people in the space to do bet tracking. There's a handful of folks doing all kinds of interesting things with bet tracking now as well. We certainly weren't the first. I believe Action Network was before us. They were essentially like one of the first mobile apps in the space to capitalize on the sports betting wave. But being early or relatively early was very helpful. The second sort of like, and I would say like probably main key insight for us was not adding manual bet tracking. This was sort of a controversial thing. It's still to date our number one most requested feature. We get requests, dozens of requests every day. Hey, I made this bet on this bookie site that I use, or I use my friend's account, or XYZ. There's a zillion reasons why you might not have a bet that you made on your account. I made it with my friend. Can I log that in Pikkit? And the answer, unfortunately, has always been no. And we've certainly lost users because of that. But part of the reason why we did that and why we've been so steadfast in that is because two things. One is we believe that transparency is key, right? You should not be able to misrepresent your performance as a bettor, especially on a social app, right? Where people are sharing their stuff on social. And it wasn't planned that Pikkit became like this kind of like Pikkit or it didn't happen or like show your Pikkit, right? We didn't cook that up as like some marketing thing. It just sort of happened. We noticed in the early days of like, people on gambling Twitter blowing smoke about, I'm up 10,000 units. And at the time, Pikkit was the only solution out there that was like, at least like, it's not perfect, right? But like pretty close to being able to verify at least just like directionally, is this person, do they know what they're talking about or not? That was one. And then the second was social has always been an interesting and an integral part of Pikkit's journey, right? We've always felt that like betting is inherently a social activity, right? Gambling Twitter shows that, group chats show that, like people want to talk about the bets they're making. We always felt that if you want to talk about the bets that you're making, you actually need to have skin in the game and you actually need to have made the bet. So when you post a bet to the feed, you want everyone who's reading that to know that the person who's saying that, hey, I think the Bills are going to win tonight, actually thinks that and is not just sort of like hypothesizing about something without any skin in the game.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point, Pranav. And I would say beyond Action Network, I know of a number of others that offered pick tracking and bet tracking services back in the day. But to your very good point here, they were all manual entry, right? Which actually defeats the purpose in the first place, right? You can't independently verify a pick or a bet was made. And really what I think allowed you guys at Pikkit to really separate yourself from the sea of other bet tracking apps is the fact that you actually get the bets validated and verified through the actual sportsbook accounts. And I believe you support now 30 plus sportsbooks within the Pikkit app where users can track all of the bets automatically. I would assume it was not easy to build that level of technical integration to get all of that happening. I would also assume that's tough to replicate. You've built a moat for yourself now on the basis of that, perhaps some of your secret sauce. Just talk a bit more about this notion of getting verified picks in the app and what that's allowed you to do from a product perspective.
The challenge with manual tracking was not only the verifiable aspect of it, right? You can't trust unless, there's been a number of solutions that have been rolled out of like, okay, verified picks. We have to verify that the line existed at the time. Sort of automatic like bet syncing is the only way to like really know that someone has real dollars behind it. But manual tracking also has the challenge of being very, very time consuming. Right. And that almost becomes the focus of the product, where like if you built like the best manual bet tracker in the world, your users are still spending I would argue, a majority of their time entering bets and not playing around with the other features that are in your app, right? It's like automatic bet tracking is kind of like what makes the product go. It makes it verifiable, it makes it, trustworthy, but also it allows the user to actually spend the time that they're spending betting and, using our app doing the things that they actually want to do, right? That was like one sort of key insight about like why the automatic bet tracking was so easy for us to like sort of hitch our wagon to. Technically very, very challenging, right? Took tons and tons of time. It still does, right? Like you mentioned, like now that you're on the other side of it, we've definitely built up the infrastructure, right? But there's all kinds of even today, right? 4 years later after launching, we still have new issues that pop up. It's very difficult to sort of like, when you talk about these kind of like integrations, whether it's in sports betting or banking, and they're all across different industries, when you're dealing with like mass amounts of raw data across millions of users, like it becomes very, very difficult to build like a generalized solution. So it's almost like, yes, the problem is difficult at the beginning, but in a lot of ways, as you scale, it gets even more difficult because there's more edge cases and like, more like, I'll give you a good example. DraftKings released this awesome promo called the Ghost Leg promo, where if you make a bet and one of your legs loses, DraftKings will grade the bet as if that leg never existed, right? That's something that they announce on like a Wednesday. It goes into effect on a Thursday. And suddenly, like Thursday night happens or Sunday night, whenever the actual promo ended, and all these bets settle, they all settle incorrectly because like our parsing and our systems were not prepared for something like that. And suddenly you're literally looking at the largest, like single largest like customer support event in Pikkit's history, just like randomly on a Sunday night because of this thing. So like these things pop up. We had like thousands of tickets created because of this one thing. We have to be very quick to respond to that kind of stuff. But like you said, it's our secret sauce, right? Being very close to the metal on this, being able to directly respond to user frustration and not have to go to a different company that we're sort of like licensing the software from, it has been a huge, huge advantage for us, because the fact is that like you can't build a one size fits all system. So you have to be able to be nimble and react to user feedback.
Yeah, and as it relates to BookSync, which is what you call this platform that allows all of these integrations with the sports books, obviously Pikkit as a consumer product benefits heavily from this IP that you have. But I also assume other consumer apps in the space would benefit from it as well. And there are some other companies out there providing this type of infrastructure. Yet for you guys, it's almost, I don't want to call it a side project internally. I'm sure you think about it much more deeply than that. But it's not your core mission, right? This is almost like technology you've developed to enable your core mission. But this technology you've developed in the process unto itself is a pretty potentially interesting business opportunity on the B2B side. Have you guys thought about commercializing BookSync as a B2B offering? And to the extent that you have, how do you sort of think about the potential of it cannibalizing the core Pikkit consumer product?
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? Like we've thought about it, right? It's not something that we've completely just been like, oh, we're never going to do this. But we've never really gotten sort of a compelling case as to why to. We've definitely had inbound, like don't really have a really compelling case why to, especially because we have like a lot of confidence in BookSync as like the sort of best in class like bet syncing technology that's out there. And like I think, maybe to a sort of a lesser example, right? But like if OpenAI somehow, right, had developed like NVIDIA level chips internally, they're probably not looking to license that out to, Google and Meta, et cetera, unless they felt like, hey, it's inevitable that Meta is going to get there. And like, we might as well capitalize on this now. That's not sort of like the feeling that we have at this point in time. So we'd like to keep riding the BookSync course as long as we can.
Right on. I want to circle back, Pranav, to you mentioned a few minutes ago, social and community, of which, that's one of the things I think really stands out for Pikkit is you guys do have this massive and massively engaged community of people using the product. And look, for all of the startups I talk to, and particularly the ones on the consumer side, everybody talks about building a social experience and building community almost as bolt-ons to the product. But for Pikkit, I mean, that's a very core integral part of the product experience itself. Talk a little bit about how you guys built that up, right? You can't just build a community overnight. These things have to happen organically and authentically. You can't just flip a switch and make it happen. Like talk about like harnessing that and really developing that in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a product of the time and era that Anthony and I were in when we first, came up with Pikkit. It was The first concept was while we were in school, right? In college, which is for, I think, most people who go to through higher level education, like usually like the most social time of your life, right? Like you're living with all your friends, you're hanging out with them all the time, you're seeing them at the bars, going to tailgates with them. That definitely played a pretty major role. The second sort of major role was the actual point at which we launched Pikkit, just in beta, was in the dead of COVID in like January of 2021, which was kind of like the exact opposite of where Anthony and I were like 6 months prior, which was, like hanging out, tailgating, going to Michigan football games. 6 months later, we were sitting in his mom's garage in Florida, like just the two of us, literally without seeing, a single person, right, for weeks at a time. So it was like kind of a period of like longing for that social that we were just a part of. And betting was sort of like a social mechanism for us at that point, right? Like that was the way that we stayed sane. The NFL playoffs were going on at that time. They just started to, sports had just sort of started to like really start to come back around that time. And our friends were firing bets to each other and saying like, there was all this conversation around bets. And in the same way that like, some teenagers bond over Instagram photos or on Pinterest or, all kinds of different social media platforms, there's a section of the world that bonds and forms human connection over talking about betting and sharing about bets and sharing wins and losses with each other. So it's always been there from the start. It's also been like really important for us just like to actually build like the core bet tracking product because of an interesting insight, which was, look, it's sports betting, right? Everyone wants to win and not everyone does all the time. Even the best sports bettors in the world go through stretches of horrible variance where they'll lose for days on end, right? And it feels like their entire process, this mathematical process, is completely fallen apart. And these are the best sports bettors in the world. Our biggest source of churn is when people lose a lot because no one wants to use a product that they're losing all the time and it's telling you that you're losing all the time. So that's why we built the social into the product and continued to invest in it, is to hopefully, while someone's going through a rough stretch of variance, they may be a good bettor, right? They might have good fundamentals. They might be, enjoying or doing everything responsibly. But the social at least makes you feel like you're part of a community, right? And you had a terrible beat because the Bills came back against the Ravens on Sunday Night Football and beat the Ravens by 1. Okay, so did 1,000 other people, right? Like at least there's someone to commiserate with and, then get back up the next day and hopefully generate some betting ideas and, find your next winner.
I want to get your take as well, just on the category that Pikkit exists in and competes in to an extent, which broadly I call the betting tools category. Of course, there's different types of betting tools serving different use cases, with Pikkit being one of them. How do you sort of view that ecosystem of tools and, the ever-growing number of tools in the space? And ultimately for Pikkit, who I would suggest is absolutely one of the leaders of that category, sort of how do you think about your guys' position within it and preserving your position?
Yeah, there's been an explosion of tools. I remember back in COVID 2021 days, like it really just felt like there was a handful of kind of like one or two companies in each sort of vertical, whether it was like trends or EV or tracking and now it's like, it feels like there's 50, right, in each. I think every single one of the betting tools, whether they're competitors or adjacent products to us, brings something unique and interesting. And, as a founder, I'll always have a ton of respect for other founders going out there and just trying to build their product and get something off the ground from nothing. As far as like our position in it, I think that the key is just to continue to innovate. We started with tracking. I would, at the time when we launched, I would argue we were one of the better trackers out there. And if we just stayed like the best bet tracker, that would be great. But there's going to be someone else who comes in and builds something similar, right? And there already are competitors that are popping up who have really good bet tracking tools, right? So it's like, how do we take the next step? How do we sort of see around these corners? Like, what are the new things that we can do to not only make the bet tracking itself better, but actually our sort of thesis is like, what's really interesting is what you can actually do with the data and the data that the users, sync on platform. Like, how can we repackage that data in a way that's interesting, right? You can pull out insights. And that's where I think, the space is heading next. Like, how can it get more customized? How can it get more, my investors will love this, but like, how can we use AI more, right? Like, how can we pull out like interesting insights that are not necessarily, apparent to the naked eye?
You and I have both referenced gambling Twitter at this point, so I want to get a quick take from you here. I've been hanging around Twitter for a long time. I've also been hanging around the sports betting corner of it for a long time prior to the PASPA being overturned, and I've seen its evolution over quite a long time horizon at this point, and I would suggest, and this is just me saying it, I would say today it's more unhinged than ever. Literally just this week, I saw somebody share a screenshot of a job posting on Upwork, which is a freelancer platform. Somebody posted a job on there looking for a graphic designer to help them essentially Photoshop a FanDuel bet slip, which is basically somebody out there probably going to now go misrepresent the bets they've made, trying to sell their picks, et cetera, et cetera. There's a million examples of activity like this happening. And for Pikkit, again, as this perhaps arbiter of truth, the fact that you guys only produce verified bets, I guess ultimately, Pranav, I would just love to get your take on the state of gambling Twitter right now and Pikkit's role perhaps in that and helping, keep things a little bit more calm and sane on there.
Yeah, I mean, our sort of company approach has always sort of tried to be like, let's be like Switzerland. We're not looking to the gambling Twitter can be very, very toxic. We're not looking in there to like sort of like drum up a storm. Like we're not trying to, create problems, but our solution exists for this exact problem, right? And I think that is like in a lot of ways the market sort of has spoken for us, right? And I saw that there's a Twitter account, Portman Tracker, who will, find some people who may be accused of editing stuff and say like, hey, like you should have no problem at least linking like a profitable Pikkit, right? Like there's a lot of reasons why a capper may not have, every single bet that they ever make on one single Pikkit. We believe that they should be, but sometimes people actually do have an edge and they don't have an out, right? If they don't have an out, like, that they may be limited on a book, et cetera, but you only get limited on these books if you're winning, right? And that means you should be able to show a winning Pikkit. So we try not to be like aggressive in it, but we're there to support, the folks who, want to stand up to, what I would argue are a lot of times bad actors in the community. And Pikkit is happy to be kind of the like check on, what I think is, run rampant now in gambling Twitter is like sort of photoshopping slips and manipulating results and things like that. We try to do our part to make sure that happens less.
And sticking with gambling Twitter for a minute, Pranav, you guys were actually the key subject of gambling Twitter a couple of weeks ago now at the start of September. Just to contextualize this and tee it up, Pikkit has a bot on Twitter. Please correct me if I'm misrepresenting here, Pranav, but you guys have a bot on there called the Quick Pick Bot, which allows users to essentially reply the Quick Pick Bot and put together a bet slip real quickly. And you guys have built a ton of cool tech behind the scenes that does very magical stuff. It essentially allows people to very easily populate and deep link to bet slips based on Twitter. You guys have been using the Twitter API for that, as have other tools in this space, including Gambly. Shout out Cal Spears and Jonathan Bales, who've built GamblyBot, which, does arguably some of the similar functionality as your Quick Pick Bot. But both yourselves and Gambly a couple of weeks ago, you lost your access to the Twitter API, and it was revealed and it came to light that Twitter did an exclusive deal with Better Collective, which owns the Action Network, and essentially gave that functionality exclusively to the Action Network, who have enabled that in their product at the expense of Pikkit and Gambly and perhaps other tools out there. So to tee this one up to you, Pranav, I just want to get your take on this whole situation. And from the outside looking in here, I mean, in the abstract, I could perceive this as being an incumbent impeding on innovation and blocking competition, maybe in the most, in the most harsh terms, but I don't have any insight, obviously. I'd love to get your take on just kind of what went down, kind of what your assessment is, and ultimately where things go from here.
Yeah. So the deep linking tech of just like being able to copy people's bets and, link out to a sports book and have it autofill your bet in the actual sports book is something that's existed in the Pikkit like mobile app product for several years now. It was one of our users, one of our fan favorite features because, you see a 5-leg parlay and you just one click the button and, autofill it into DraftKings or FanDuel, whichever book you want to use. And it just made the process of like finding a bet, creating a bet and actually placing it, take it from 2 minutes to like 5 seconds, right? I certainly cannot claim credit for, the sort of like bot application of this. Like Gambly really pioneered that. Cal and John are awesome. And I have a ton of respect for them and their company. So they launched, I believe, GamblyBot in February. We had been working on sort of like similar applications on Discord and a couple other platforms. And that we saw that and we were like, okay, we gotta we got to accelerate our development of this. We launched it a couple months later. For several months, like Gambly and Quick Pick Bot, which is our Picket's product, competing product, competed in sort of like a very healthy way and how competition should be, right? Like we would release something that they didn't have and they were like, oh, we should build something like that. And then they would release something that we didn't have, or their quality got better and ours was, lagging behind, and it pushed us both to get better. And that's what competition is supposed to do. Yeah. And then in sort of like the late summer, we started to get the sense that this access to the Twitter API was kind of like being called into question, like, hey, are you guys on the right plan? Should we move you up and down? Like, and sort of like all the discussions that we kind of had were kind of around that. And then, yeah, relatively abruptly at the end of August, we got an email from Twitter saying like, hey, effective end of day tomorrow, your access is going to get shut off, right? It was an ongoing conversation, but we certainly did not think it was going to come to that abruptly. And we were like, okay, well, it seems like they're doing this across all reply bot type products or maybe all bet slip type products. And then, yeah, there was a competing product released by Better Collective that magically, and I believe in coincidences, but I don't think this was a coincidence, that, 1 minute after we got shut off, a brand new competitor popped up and essentially has like free reign on that entire market, right? And we were not surprised. I don't think that this was behavior that was completely unexpected, from the folks that released that product. We were more disappointed that, in just 4 or 5 months, we had built a really awesome community of folks who enjoyed using our product, really, really loved it. And an incumbent sort of came in and just didn't want to compete on the merits of their own product, right? And felt that they wanted to compete, using dollars, which if I had whatever, $600 million market cap, 500 million, I can't blame them, right? But I'm just disappointed. And I think I'd sort of leave it at that. We're hopeful that Twitter, or X, I should say, hopefully comes to its senses a little bit and embraces the ethos on which it was founded, which was being the town square, right? Being an open platform that celebrates free speech, celebrates competition, celebrates innovation. Whether that day comes, I don't know. I hope it does, and we're working to. We have lots of people on our side. We have lots of users who have written to X without our prompting either, right? Just saying like, hey, at Elon, at Nikita Beer, who's the head of product there, hey, like you guys should enable all the bots, right? They should all compete for users, for usage. And, we hope that we can find that compromise one day.
Well, hopefully they come to their senses. Elon, Nikita, if you're listening, hook up our friends at Gambly and Pikkit. In the meantime, it sounds, Pranav, as though you're very much taking the high road with this. So, kudos to you and the team for just, the maturity in their response to it, very professional. Can't say everybody would necessarily respond that way. But yeah, hopefully this gets resolved soon. And, I'm still seeing a flood of tweets in my timeline from people advocating to get them back. So you guys have obviously tapped into a passionate user base, both you and Gambly, with your respective products in a relatively short amount of time. So very validating, very disappointing. Again, hopefully it's resolved for you guys soon here. I want to quickly touch on as well the capital side of all of this. You mentioned a few minutes ago, you do have some investors. Can you quickly speak to just the fundraising background? Who do you guys raise money from? I guess ultimately, what's allowed you to build up until this point from a capital perspective?
Yeah, we've raised about $9 million to date, and that was over 3 rounds over 3 years. First capital came into the company in 2021. That was our pre-seed round. And then we raised every year, 21, 22, 23. And then 2024 was an important milestone for us. We reached cashflow positive, a cashflow positive position. And now are just, we launched our subscription product, which is growing really well. Our affiliate side of our business is growing quite a bit. The ads and partnership side is also growing quite a bit. So the company is growing, the revenue is growing. What we intend on doing is we plan on raising more money if we need to, right? And if we have found this sort of like super repeatable business function that we're like, we need to just like take as much money as we can and pour it into, marketing and ads and, et cetera. We're not there yet. Right. And I think that that's sort of like where our head is at is, the company's growing. We're going to triple year over year, or roughly triple year over year. And we're doing that. Cash flow positive will be pretty profitable this year. So that's kind of where we're at as far as like fundraising goes. I'm not opposed to raising more money, but at the same time, right, like that we want to make sure that we're getting 3x value out of the money that we're raising, or we'll just continue to grow the team, grow the product, and all the different things that we're doing just sort of through the existing business.
Always nice to fund growth through revenue and you don't have to dilute yourselves, right?
Yeah. I wish I learned that lesson a little earlier, but that's all right.
That's all right, man. There's something to be said for having a smaller piece of a big pie than a big piece of a small pie. So it's all perspective, I guess. Look, Pranav, every year, or at least for the last few years, most of us in the Western world that are consumers of technology products are now conditioned to expect the Spotify Wrapped in our inbox sometime around December. Pikkit has taken a page out of that playbook. And I think for the last 2, maybe 3 years, you guys have released kind of your own version of that called Instant Replay. And for last year, and granted this is now, 9-month-old data, but at least as of the last one you guys issued, you talked publicly about having, I think, 600,000 active users. You've logged something like $10 billion worth of bets, and like these crazy metrics that really, again, just speak to the traction you guys have. If you look ahead over the next 5 years, Pranav, and given the growth trajectory you guys are on, in your wildest dreams, where's Pikkit at 5 years from now?
My wildest dreams? Hit me with the deep questions. I think where Pikkit is in 5 years, it's when you think betting, right? Like Pikkit is the app that you open, right? And I think everyone in the space wants that. They want to be like the homepage for betting. I think that Pikkit, and you'll see this if you look at our like minute by minute usage charts, you'll see that most people use Pikkit during and after a game, right? Like we actually have issues, like server issues, because like after a game ends, like a really exciting game, we have, tens of thousands of users pouring into the platform, like trying to refresh their bets, trying to see, what their net P&L on the day was. And like, we've gotten better at managing that, but that's like where a lot of our usage is focused, is like the post betting activity. But when someone wants to make a bet, right? I think in like 5 years, right? Like if we are able to be like, okay, I want to make a bet, let me go to Pikkit first and see what people are betting on, or, talk to maybe to preview some stuff that we're working on, talk to my sort of like AI companion in the app and just be like, hey, what, based on my betting history in the last 30 days, like what are like opportunities for me to bet on today, right? And it might say like, oh, you're really good with first touchdown scorer. Like here are the best odds for first touchdown scorer. I think like sort of maximizing that function allows the company to be, and the products that we build to be in like really interesting sort of positions, tie-ins, like, hey, was there an opportunity eventually where like you can actually place a bet or a trade from within the Pikkit app itself without ever leaving, right? That's something that we've talked about, but all of it sort of stems or hinges on us sort of like becoming the homepage for betting at every single point in the betting life cycle or betting journey. And that's what we're sort of laser focused on for the next several years.
All right. Well, if that was a deep question, we're going to take it home. Here with some very shallow questions for you. So we're going to go with our rapid fire questions. Pranav, first one, I will tee it up. When you get up in the morning, check your phone. What's the first app you're opening?
Oh man, probably TikTok. If I had to guess, like TikTok or Twitter. Like I'm hopelessly addicted to those apps.
All right. If you're out at the karaoke lounge, what song are you singing?
Piano Man.
And last one here for you. If you could be anybody dead or alive for one day only, who would it be?
Tiger Woods. I just love to flush a golf ball like him.
All right, Pranav, for people listening that want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that? And of course, go ahead and plug any touch points for the Pikkit product itself.
Yeah, best way to get in touch with me is on Twitter. Trying to be more active there. I've always been like one of the 99% that just scrolls. I'm trying to become more of the 1% that posts. So I tend to be pretty active on Twitter. You can find me at Pranav Tad, or just search Pikkit. And I'm always monitoring the Pikkit sort of corporate DMs as well. So if you need to get in touch with me there, you can do that too.
Right on, man. Well, look, I'm really appreciative that we finally got to do this together. Will I see you at G2E in a couple of weeks, by the way?
Yes. Yes, you will.
A reluctant yes. Okay, I heard that.
I'm excited. This should be a fun G2E.
It will. Well, Pranav, I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks, but more importantly, wishing you and the team much continued success and look forward to seeing what's next from Pikkit.
Likewise. Thanks.
The Betting Startups podcast is presented by Optimove, the creator of positionless marketing and the #1 player engagement platform. Positionless marketing gives every marketer the power to execute any marketing task instantly and independently, and Optimove Ignite Plus is its program to support early-stage iGaming startups. If you're attending G2E in Las Vegas this October, you can find Optimove at stand number 2630, and tell them that Betting Startup sent you to receive your first month free.